Great. Thank you so much, Nora. We are now officially 102 days away from the November 3rd general election, with the country continuing to be divided over the president's response to the pandemic, a struggling economy, and calls for social change. Joining us now is Governor Larry Hogan of the great state of Maryland. He's also author of Standing Still: Surviving Cancer, Riots, a Global Pandemic, and the Toxic Politics That Divide America. Governor, great privilege to have you taking the time to join us here on this Friday. I do want to begin with the election. In your new book, you write that some members, you say, of Donald Trump's own White House, his own administration at one point, urged you privately to try and primary the president. Why did you decide ultimately not to run for the Republican nomination in 2020?
Well, I wasn't really giving it too much serious thought, but that just goes to show the kinds of discussions that were being taken place out there. I had a number of people encouraging me to do so, but I didn't really think that there was much of a chance of a Republican challenge in a primary this year. But there were certainly a lot of people concerned about whether the president was going to be able to win a general election in November.
I want to be clear here that you're talking about cabinet officials. Is there anyone on the record perhaps you'd be willing to name? I think that's pretty shocking to people to say there's people who work for the president who are kind of nudging you behind the scenes a bit.
It was shocking to me. As I said in the book, I was, I understood that there were some folks in the media and some people in the party that were disenchanted and who were would love to see kind of a battle in the primary. But it really took me aback that there were a couple of people, high-level officials in the administration. But I don't want to divulge confidences of a couple of private conversations. But it was interesting to hear that some folks were that concerned about the president's chances.
Fair enough, Governor. You'll understand that's part of my job is to try and ask and get those answers. I do want to bring your attention to something else that you write in the book. You write, quote, "I'm respectful of President Trump, but unlike a lot of Republicans, I won't just stay silent, swear allegiance, and blindly toe the line." Who are some of those Republicans that you're referencing who kind of like blindly swear allegiance to Donald Trump? And more importantly, perhaps, what is your message to those Republicans?
Well, I think there are a lot of folks, understandably, that are, sometimes they might speak in private about some concerns about maybe something that the president is doing or not doing, and we'll talk about those things. But they may not be willing to come up and say those things publicly and take the wrath of a tweet or potentially getting primaried or being attacked. And, I'm just in a different position. I'm in a very blue state, the bluest state in the country as a Republican. I'm willing to stand up and say the things that I think. I'm just not as reluctant to speak out and say exactly what I think. And I'm leading the nation's governors as chairman of the NGA. So I represent governors on both sides of the aisle, and it's my job to speak up when I think we need some help from the president or when we think that they're heading off in the wrong direction.
Governor Hogan, back in 2016, you now famously wrote in your own father's name instead of voting for either Donald Trump or former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. Looking ahead here to the November election, do you have any plans perhaps to vote for Joe Biden?
It's a long way off until November, and I'm really focused in the middle of this global pandemic and this economic crisis that we're dealing with, and we'll have plenty of time between now and November to figure out, just like a lot of people in America. We've got a lot of questions about where we're going to head as a country and what the future is going to look like, but I haven't made that decision.
So it is at least on the table, because to your own point, you bring up you do represent a largely blue state. There's going to be some interest out there. I mean, that would certainly be something of interest to people. It's at least up for consideration.
Well, it's possible I may just decide to write somebody in. I mean, I'm one of those folks. I think there are a lot of people in America that are pretty frustrated with the choices that we have coming up in November, and not sure that these are the best that we could do in either party. But look, right now I'm focused on trying to solve some of these problems. I've got to work together with the president and the administration and with Democrats and Republicans and the governors and in Congress to try to get some important relief that we need to keep our economy going and get us back on track. So I'm going to try to avoid the partisan politics for a little while.
Fair enough. Looking ahead to 2024 and beyond here, Governor Hogan, a lot of people think that at some point the GOP will need to shed its longstanding label of Trumpism. A lot of people say, hey, the future of the Republican Party is going to be nationally recognized Republicans who disavow the Trump brand of politics. What do you see as being the future of the GOP?
I think after November, regardless of what happens, I think there is going to be a future in the Republican Party beyond President Trump. That's either going to be in a few months or at the end of 4 years. And I think we've got to look to what the future looks like. I've always argued for a bigger tent party that's more inclusive, that reaches out to more people. And I think we are going to have those conversations, and I'm hopeful that we can move in a different direction.
Where's the Republican Party falling short right now, would you say, with regards to nationally important issues?
Well, I think we're doing a poor job of communicating and reaching out and trying to appeal to a broader base. I've been able to do that here in my state where, I've got overwhelming the support of young people, which the Republicans are not doing very well with. With the suburban women, we've done a good job of getting crossover voters from independents and discerning Democrats, and with minority voters, black voters, Hispanic voters, and Asian voters. And these are all groups that I think the Republicans are having a hard time selling a message to or paying attention to. And we can't keep shrinking the Republican Party's base and expect to continue to compete and win national elections. I'm all for a big tent and reaching out and trying to find ways to come up with some bipartisan common sense solutions.
Governor, between the pandemic and ongoing racial unrest, how concerned are you about a so-called blue wave, be it in the White House, the Senate, or the Democrats expanding their lead in the House of Representatives?
It's a legitimate concern. I mean, if the election were held today, I think that's exactly what we would see is a big blue wave. It's still a long way off. 100 days is almost a lifetime in politics. But, I survived a blue wave in 2018. We lost Republican governors across the country. We lost the House of Representatives. We lost legislative bodies and legislative seats everywhere. We could see a repeat of that, but, we'll see what happens over the next 100 days. It's a very difficult time for the Republican Party.
We are seeing here, Governor Hogan, some coronavirus cases continuing to surge in key parts of your own state of Maryland. Why would you say this is happening? Talk to us a bit about the steps that you and your colleagues are taking there in Maryland to try and kind of limit some of these numbers, especially as you look ahead to the rest of 2020.
Well, I was kind of on the forefront of taking some very early and aggressive action in our state to try to flatten the curve. And we were the first, one of the first states in the country to declare a state of emergency. One of the first, I think, the first state to close our schools. We had to, issue a stay-at-home order, and many of the aggressive actions you've seen in different places around the country. We're doing much better than many of the states, but we are seeing some concerning signs where we're seeing really substantial spikes and outbreaks, and we're concerned that by no means is this virus behind us. We've got to continue to stay vigilant and stay on top of it. We're trying to gradually and safely reopen our economy, but we have to do it in a way that's going to help stop the spread. It's about robust testing and contact tracing and making sure that we're doing all the things we've been talking about for months, which is masking and social distancing and continuing to do the things that we all know can help stop this spread.
Governor Hogan, there will always be critics, but you have also earned yourself a fair share of praise with how you've handled your own statewide response to the coronavirus. I'm curious, through your perspective, Governor Hogan, what grade would you give President Donald Trump and the federal government for how they've handled the federal response to COVID-19?
Well, I hate to be overly critical in the middle of the fight because we're all trying to work together at the federal, state, and local level, and we're in the middle of a battle. But I've been fairly open and honest about the fact that I think they fell short, particularly early on in this crisis when we let several months go by, not messaging about the seriousness of the virus and not getting ahead of this, when we could have developed the national testing strategy and we perhaps could have tamped it down. So I think we've certainly, we're not going to give a very high grade, I would think, to the president's response.
Allow me to conclude with this here, Governor Hogan. On June 2nd, you held your statewide primary. There were huge problems with both the state and the city board of elections. You, sir, have already been on record as saying there were unacceptable and inexcusable mistakes that were made. Help me better understand exactly what went wrong in your estimation. How do you ensure that Maryland does not have severe electoral issues come Tuesday, November 3rd?
Well, so we were in the middle of the peak of the crisis, in the middle of a state of emergency, and through an executive order and an emergency order, I broadened the primary to allow people to just exclusively vote by mail with a handful of precincts that were open. The State Board of Elections, which is an independent body, really had some major errors. They mailed out ballots late. They mailed the wrong ballots to the wrong districts. They sent out ballots with the wrong language, and what we ended up with was huge crowds of people who were the only way they could vote was to show up at a handful of precincts, which was the last thing we really wanted, and had 4-hour waits to try to vote. So this time we're trying to address that by doing an all the above approach. We're one of 14 states in the country where we're and we're mailing out absentee ballot applications to every single voter. We're encouraging people to vote by mail if possible because it's the safest way. We have early voting, and if you can't vote by mail or don't want to, we're going to encourage you to go out and vote early for 8 days, and then we'll still have all the polls open on Election Day in a safe and socially distanced way with PPE and protective. But we're hoping this all of the above approach will try to spread out the issues and problems, and we're going to stay on top of these independent election boards to make sure, do our best to ensure that they don't have the same continual problems that they had in the primary. Which
now, Governor Hogan, you know as well as I do, and I'll conclude with this here, sir, that the president has openly said that an increase of mail-in voting, he says, will lead to a rigged election here for 2020. Is that a line of thinking that you also subscribe to? What would be your response to those who are listening to the president of the United States and are now concerned that a surge of mail-in voting, even if it's through the lens of trying to keep people safe, is going to somehow taint the election results?
Well, I think everybody wants to make sure we have a free and fair election and that we don't have tainted results. But I can tell you that we've been on the forefront of this and been doing really aggressive mail-in voting by absentee ballots for 20 years in our state very successfully. And I just don't share the same concerns that the president has. I think we can conduct it and make sure that it's done fairly and properly and give everybody as much chance as possible to go out and exercise their vote in whatever way they see fit.
Governor Larry Hogan for the great state of Maryland. He's the author of the new book, Still Standing: Surviving Cancer Riots, a Global Pandemic and the Toxic Politics That Divide America. That book comes out Tuesday of next week. Governor, huge privilege to have you taking the time to join us here on Closing Bell on this Friday. Thanks a lot. Best of luck to you and your constituents.
Thank you very much.
Ali, my good friend, going to toss things back to you.